A gunshot split the morning air, making Fiona Morgan flinch as she folded the last of her dresses into the worn leather trunk. The commotion outside her window was typical for Copper Creek, Arizona territory. 1885, another saloon brawl spilling into the dusty main street. She didn't bother looking. In 24 hours, she'd be on the eastbound train, leaving this godforsaken town and all its painful memories behind forever. The small room above the mercantile had been her home for nearly 2 years, but now cardboard boxes and trunks occupied most of the floor space. Everything she owned would fit on a single wagon to the train depot. Fiona caught her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall, green eyes rimmed with fatigue, chestnut hair twisted in a practical bun, and a determined set to her jaw that hadn't been there when she'd first arrived out west as a wide-eyed schoolteacher. "Miss Morgan? You still packing up there?" Mrs. Henderson's voice called from below, the floorboards creaking as the mercantile owner climbed the narrow stairs. Fiona straightened, pushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Nearly finished, Mrs. Henderson." The older woman appeared in the doorway, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. Her eyes surveyed the packed room with undisguised disappointment. "Still determined to leave us, then?" The school board made their decision. Fiona's voice was steady despite the flutter of anger in her chest. "They don't need an unmarried female teacher whose methods are too progressive for their tastes." Mrs. Henderson clucked her tongue. "That old fool Barnaby and his cronies wouldn't know good teaching if it came with a gold seal. The children adore you." "And I adore them," Fiona replied, closing the trunk with a definitive click. "But I can't stay in a town where I'm not wanted. My cousin in Boston has found me a position at a ladies' academy. It's for the best." A commotion from the street drew both women to the window. A small crowd had gathered around two men, one sprawled in the dirt, the other standing over him with fists clenched. The standing man wore a dark hat pulled low over his eyes, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and worn denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. Even from this distance, Fiona recognized Quentin Blackwood, owner of the Double Star Ranch outside town. "Speak of the devil," Mrs. Henderson muttered. "There's your Mr. Blackwood teaching another lesson." "He's not my anything," Fiona replied quickly, though she couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene. The man on the ground scrambled to his feet, spitting blood into the dust. Words were exchanged, too distant to hear, before the fallen man slunk away toward the saloon. The crowd dispersed, and Quentin Blackwood turned, his gaze lifting to her window. Even with the distance between them, Fiona felt the intensity of his stare. She stepped back quickly, her heart racing unexpectedly. "That man has been sweet on you since you arrived," Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile. "Half the unmarried women in the territory would give their eye teeth for him to look their way, and he only has eyes for our schoolteacher." "Mrs. Henderson, please." Fiona busied herself with another box. "Mr. Blackwood and I barely know each other. He's just a man who brings his niece to school and attends town meetings. A man who specifically requested you tutor young Sarah privately. A man who defended your teaching methods at the school board meeting quite passionately, I heard." Fiona's hands stilled. She hadn't known that last part. "It doesn't matter now. By this time tomorrow, I'll be miles away from Copper Creek." Mrs. Henderson sighed deeply. "Sometimes running away isn't the answer, dear." "I'm not running away," Fiona insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "I'm moving forward. There's nothing for me here." After Mrs. Henderson left, Fiona sat heavily on the edge of her bed, the only piece of furniture not yet packed or covered. The truth was more complicated than she'd admitted. Quentin Blackwood did affect her, more than she cared to acknowledge. Their interactions had always been proper but charged with an undercurrent of something unspoken. He wasn't like the other men in Copper Creek, there was a depth to him, a quiet intensity that both intrigued and frightened her. But allowing herself to care would be foolish. Her last serious suitor back east had abandoned her when her father's investments failed, leaving them penniless. She'd learned her lesson about depending on a man's affections. Besides, Quentin was established here with his ranch and responsibilities. She was just a passing chapter in Copper Creek Story 1 that was about to end. A knock at the door downstairs interrupted her thoughts. Moments later, Mrs. Henderson called up, "Miss Morgan, you have a visitor." Fiona quickly smoothed her skirt and checked her appearance before descending the stairs. Standing in the mercantile, hat in hand, was Quentin Blackwood himself. Up close, the evidence of his recent altercation was clear reddened knuckles and a small cut above his right eyebrow. "Miss Morgan," he said, his deep voice carrying through the store. "Might I have a word?" Mrs. Henderson busied herself in the far corner, pretending not to listen while clearly straining to hear every word. "Mr. Blackwood," Fiona acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. "This is unexpected." He gestured toward the door. "Perhaps we could speak outside?" The afternoon sun was harsh after the dimness of the mercantile. Fiona squinted against the light, grateful for the shade of the wooden awning. Quentin Blackwood stood beside her, taller than she remembered, his broad shoulders blocking the sunlight. Up close, she noted the details she tried to ignore during their previous encounters: the weathered tan of his face, the laugh lines around his eyes, the flecks of gray at his temples contrasting with otherwise dark hair. "I heard you're leaving town," he said without preamble. "News travels fast in Copper Creek. Small towns." He nodded, a hint of a smile crossing his face before disappearing. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned the school board's decision. It's wrong what they did." Fiona lifted her chin. "It's their prerogative. I serve at their pleasure. The children will suffer for it. Sarah hasn't stopped talking about your lessons since you started tutoring her." He twisted his hat in his hands, a surprisingly nervous gesture from a man known for his confidence. "I came to ask if you might reconsider." "Reconsider?" Fiona repeated, surprised. "Mr. Blackwood, the decision has been made. I've already arranged for passage east, and my replacement arrives next week. What if there was another position for you here?" His blue eyes held hers steadily. "One not subject to Barnaby and his narrow-minded board?" Fiona frowned. "I don't understand." Quentin took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "My niece needs more than occasional tutoring. She needs a full-time teacher, someone to prepare her properly for the future. I'd like to offer you a position at Double Star, teaching Sarah and overseeing her education." The offer caught Fiona completely off guard. "You want me to come live at your ranch as a private governess? You'd have your own cabin, the old foreman's place. It's small but comfortable. Complete independence. And I'd pay double what the school board offered." The proposition was tempting, financially sensible, and it would allow her to continue teaching. Yet the impropriety of it struck her immediately. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the offer, but an unmarried woman living on a ranch with a bachelor? The scandal would be immediate. My reputation would be ruined." "Not if," he stopped, jaw clenching as if reconsidering his words. "Not if you had a proper place there." "A proper place?" Fiona echoed, perplexed. Quentin stared at her, an internal struggle evident on his face. Finally, he spoke words that shattered her composure entirely. "Stay and be my wife." The world seemed to stop. Pedestrians continued moving along the boardwalk. Horses and wagons rolled past in the street. But Fiona stood frozen, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" she finally managed. "Marry me," he repeated, his voice stronger now. "Stay in Copper Creek. Be Sarah's teacher. Be my wife. Be part of what I'm building at Double Star." Fiona stared at him, speechless. This was madness. They barely knew each other beyond polite greetings and discussions of his niece's education. "Mr. Blackwood, this is highly irregular. We've scarcely had conversations beyond Sarah's schooling." "I know how it sounds," he admitted, a flush creeping up his neck. "But I've watched you these past 2 years. How you care for the children, how you stand your ground against men twice your size when you believe in something. I admire you, Miss Morgan. Respect you. The rest can grow from there. You're suggesting a marriage of convenience." The words tasted strange on her tongue. "I'm suggesting a partnership," he corrected. "One that could benefit us both. You need a position, I need someone for Sarah. And perhaps, in time." He let the implication hang in the air between them. Fiona's mind raced. This was absurd, impulsive, completely contrary to her carefully laid plans. Yet something in his steady gaze made her hesitate where she should have immediately refused. "This is not a decision to make standing on a street corner," she finally said. "And my train leaves tomorrow." "Have dinner with me tonight," he said quickly. "At the hotel restaurant. Bring Mrs. Henderson as chaperone if you wish. Let me make my case properly. After that, if your answer is still no, I'll personally drive you to the train station tomorrow." Rational thought told her to refuse, to stick to her plan. But the intensity in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, made her consider the unthinkable. "7 o'clock, she said finally. "And yes, Mrs. Henderson will accompany me." Relief flooded his face. 7 it is. He settled his hat back on his head with a nod. "Until tonight, Miss Morgan." Fiona watched him stride away, his tall figure commanding attention as he moved down the street. Only when he disappeared around the corner did she release the breath she'd been holding. What had she just agreed to? And more importantly, why was her heart racing at the prospect of hearing more about this outlandish proposal? The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Copper Creek, which wasn't saying much. Still, the tables were covered with clean cloths, the silverware polished, and the lone waiter wore a stiff collar with his slightly faded black suit. Mrs. Henderson had been scandalized and thrilled in equal measure when Fiona explained the dinner invitation, and now sat beside her at the table, practically vibrating with excitement. "A marriage proposal. After all this time pining for you," he finally spoke up when you're about to leave. "It's like something from a novel," the older woman whispered, adjusting her best bonnet. "He's not pining for me," Fiona corrected, smoothing her navy blue dress, the only one she hadn't packed. "It's a practical arrangement he's proposing. For his niece's education." "Practical arrangements don't come with that look in a man's eyes," Mrs. Henderson replied knowingly. "I've been married 30 years, dear. I know the difference." Before Fiona could respond, Quentin entered the restaurant. He'd clearly made an effort for the evening. His usually untamed dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Several diners turned to watch as he approached their table, and Fiona was acutely aware of the speculation that would be racing through town by morning. "Mrs. Henderson, Miss Morgan." He greeted them with a slight bow before taking his seat. "Thank you for joining me." The waiter arrived promptly with a bottle of wine, and soon they were engaged in surprisingly comfortable conversation. Quentin proved to be knowledgeable about topics beyond ranching, discussing literature, current events, even educational theory. Mrs. Henderson contributed cheerfully to the discussion, though Fiona noted how the older woman gradually withdrew, strategically allowing them more direct interaction as the meal progressed. Over dessert apple pie that didn't compare to Mrs. Henderson's but was passable, Quentin finally returned to the reason for their meeting. "I realize my proposal this afternoon was abrupt," he began, his voice low enough that nearby diners couldn't overhear. "I should have approached it differently." "It was certainly unexpected," Fiona agreed, setting down her fork. Let me explain properly. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. My brother and his wife died in a fever outbreak 3 years ago. Sarah came to live with me at 10 years old, grieving and frightened. I've done my best, but a ranch is no place for a young girl without proper guidance. The schooling in town is inadequate, as you well know. The curriculum is outdated, Fiona acknowledged, thinking of her frustrated attempts to introduce newer teaching methods. Sarah needs more than she's getting. She's bright, curious. She deserves every opportunity. His eyes held Fiona's steadily. When you began tutoring her, I saw a change almost immediately. She was excited about learning again, making plans for her future. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. Miss Morgan has that effect on all her students. I've built a successful ranch, Quentin continued. I can provide Sarah with financial security, but I can't give her what you can: education, refinement, a woman's guidance. That's what I'm offering you a chance to provide, while continuing the teaching work you clearly love. And marriage is the only way to accomplish this? Fiona asked directly. He met her gaze unflinchingly. In this town? Yes. You know as well as I do that a single woman living on a bachelor's ranch would be ruined in the eyes of society, regardless of the innocence of the arrangement. I won't do that to your reputation. Very considerate, Fiona murmured, not entirely without irony. I'm offering stability, security, and purpose, he continued. A home of your own, a good living, and the freedom to teach as you see fit without interference from small-minded men like Barnaby. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. And what of other marital expectations, Mr. Blackwood? A young woman has a right to know. Fiona felt heat rush to her face. Mrs. Henderson. Quentin cleared his throat, but to his credit, he answered directly. I'm proposing a true marriage, Miss Morgan, but I would never press unwelcome attentions. We would begin as partners with mutual respect. Anything more would develop naturally or not at all. The honesty in his voice was impossible to dismiss. Fiona studied him, trying to reconcile this thoughtful man with the intimidating figure she'd observed from a distance for 2 years. You barely know me, she said finally. I know enough, he replied simply. I know you're intelligent, principled, and kind. I know you fight for what matters to you. I know you see potential in children that others miss. The rest, I'm willing to discover over time. And if we find we don't suit, if this partnership becomes untenable, then I would ensure you have the means to establish yourself elsewhere, with references and connections to find another teaching position. His answer was immediate, as if he'd considered this possibility. I'm not offering a prison, Miss Morgan. I'm offering an opportunity. The directness of his proposal, stripped of romantic pretense but not without respect, was strangely compelling. Fiona had never been one for flowery sentiments and false promises. This transparent negotiation, however unusual, appealed to her practical nature. May I have until tomorrow morning to consider? She asked finally. This is not a decision to make hastily. Relief crossed his features. Of course, the train doesn't leave until noon. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. This was my mother's. If your answer is yes, it would honor me if you would wear it. If not, no hard feelings. The ring inside was surprisingly delicate, a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds in a gold setting. Not ostentatious, but clearly valuable and well cared for. Like his proposal, it was both practical and thoughtful. I'll walk you back to the mercantile, he said, signaling for the bill, and call for you at 9 tomorrow morning. As they walked through the quiet streets, Mrs. Henderson tactfully dropped back a few paces, giving them a semblance of privacy. One question, Mr. Blackwood, Fiona said quietly. Why now? If you've had these thoughts for some time, why wait until I'm literally packed to leave? He was silent for several steps before answering. Fear, Miss Morgan. The same reason most opportunities are missed. I told myself you were settled here, that there would be time. When I heard you were leaving. His voice trailed off before he continued more firmly. Let's just say it clarified things. They reached the mercantile, and he tipped his hat in farewell. Until tomorrow, Miss Morgan. Whatever your decision, I respect your consideration. Later, in her half-empty room, Fiona sat by the window, staring at the ring box she'd placed on the windowsill. Mrs. Henderson had finally stopped her excited chatter and gone to bed, leaving Fiona alone with the most important decision of her life. The Boston position was secure, respectable, and exactly what she'd planned. It represented safety, a return to the world she understood. Quentin's offer was uncertain, a leap into the unknown with a man she barely knew, in a place that had already rejected her professionally. Yet as she imagined herself teaching in a stuffy Boston classroom, surrounded by brick and stone instead of open sky, something inside her rebelled. The West had changed her, opened her to possibilities she hadn't imagined before. Could she really leave it behind so easily? And then there was Quentin himself, direct, honest, surprisingly well-spoken beneath his rugged exterior. A man who fought for what he valued, who recognized her worth when others dismissed it. A man offering not romantic fantasy but respectful partnership. Dawn found her still awake, her decision finally crystallized as the first light touched the eastern mountains. At precisely 9 o'clock, a wagon pulled up outside the mercantile. Quentin sat in the driver's seat, his expression carefully neutral. He wore simpler clothes than the previous evening, the working clothes of a rancher rather than a suitor. It seemed fitting somehow. Fiona stepped onto the boardwalk, a small valise in her hand. Her trunks remained inside, packed and ready. "Good morning, Miss Morgan," he said, climbing down from the wagon. "Have you reached a decision?" "I have." She took a deep breath, the weight of her choice settling over her like a mantle. "Before I give my answer, I need to be absolutely clear about something." He nodded, waiting. "I will not be a convenient housekeeper or a mere governess with a ring. If I agree to this, it will be as a true partner. I will expect my voice to carry equal weight in decisions regarding Sarah's education and welfare. I will expect respect for my methods and independence in my teaching." "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not finished," she continued, finding strength in articulating her terms. "I want to establish a proper school at Double Star, not just for Sarah, but for the children of your ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders who can't make the daily trip to town. I want your support in building that." A slow smile spread across his face. "You've given this considerable thought." "I have." She met his gaze steadily. "Those are my conditions." "They're more than reasonable," he said. "In fact, they align perfectly with what I had hoped. Does this mean your answer is yes?" Fiona extended her hand, the pearl ring glinting on her finger in the morning sunlight. "It means, Mr. Blackwood, that you have yourself a wife and Sarah has herself a teacher." His smile broadened, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "Then I'm a fortunate man on both counts." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Quentin," he added, "if we're to be married, you should use my given name." "Quentin," she repeated, testing the feel of it. "And I'm Fiona." "Fiona," he echoed, still holding her hand. "Shall we tell Mrs. Henderson the news? I suspect she's watching from behind the curtain." Sure enough, the mercantile window curtain twitched, and moments later Mrs. Henderson burst through the door, beaming with satisfaction. "I knew it. Didn't I tell you, dear? A perfect match." The news spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. By midday, when Fiona should have been boarding the eastbound train, She was instead sitting in the town's small church with Reverend Parker, discussing arrangements for a wedding in 2 weeks' time. Quick but respectable, the Reverend had agreed. Given Mr. Blackwood's standing in the community and the practical nature of the union. Practical. The word kept surfacing in discussions of their engagement. Yet as Fiona watched Quentin handle the arrangements with quiet efficiency, consulting her on each decision rather than dictating terms, she wondered if there might be more to this union than mere practicality. That evening, Quentin drove her out to Double Star Ranch to see what would soon be her home. The main house surprised her larger than she'd expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. It stood on a gentle rise, overlooking rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. "My father built the original cabin," Quentin explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "I expanded it after he passed. Added proper glass windows, the extra bedrooms, the porch. It's beautiful," Fiona said honestly, taking in the craftsmanship evident in the details. "Uncle Quentin," a young voice called out, and a girl with dark braids came running from the barn. She stopped short at the sight of Fiona, suddenly shy. "Sarah, come meet Miss Morgan," Quentin called, "though soon you'll be calling her something else." The girl approached cautiously, studying Fiona with intelligent eyes that reminded her strongly of her uncle's. "Are you really going to marry Uncle Quentin?" "I am," Fiona confirmed. "And I'll be your teacher as well, if that's agreeable to you." Sarah's face lit up. "Every day? Not just twice a week. Every day. In fact, your uncle and I have been discussing establishing a proper school here at Double Star, for you and other children in the area." "Really?" Sarah turned to her uncle, who nodded confirmation. The girl launched herself at him in a fierce hug before extending the same enthusiastic greeting to Fiona, who returned it with surprised pleasure. "I'll show you my books." Sarah grabbed Fiona's hand. "And the bird's nest I found, and the map I've been drawing of the creek." "Sarah." Quentin's voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Morgan has had a long day. There will be time for all that later. Why don't you help Mrs. Garcia finish dinner while I show her around?" The girl reluctantly agreed, darting back toward the house after one more delighted smile at Fiona. "She's been asking about you non-stop since I told her this morning," Quentin said, a hint of apology in his voice. "I've never seen her so excited." "She's wonderful," Fiona replied sincerely. "You've done well with her." "I've done my best," he said, "but she needs more than I can give her alone." He gestured toward a smaller cabin about 50 yards from the main house. "That's the old foreman's cabin I mentioned. It's yours until the wedding, if you'd prefer your own space. After that, well, there's plenty of room in the main house." The implication hung between them after the wedding. They would share a home as husband and wife. The reality of what she'd agreed to suddenly felt immediate and overwhelming. Quentin must have read something in her expression. "One step at a time," he said quietly. "No expectations beyond what you're comfortable with." His sensitivity calmed her nerves. This man, for all his imposing physical presence, seemed attuned to her feelings in a way she hadn't anticipated. Dinner that evening was a lively affair, with Sarah dominating the conversation, peppering Fiona with questions about books, lessons, and life in the East. Mrs. Garcia, the housekeeper, served a meal far better than the hotel's offerings, watching with approval as Fiona engaged enthusiastically with the girl. After Sarah reluctantly went to bed, Quentin invited Fiona to sit on the porch. The night was cool, stars speckling the vast sky above them. "Sarah adores you already," he said, settling into a chair beside her. "That alone tells me I made the right decision. She's a bright girl. Teaching her will be a pleasure." Fiona looked out at the darkened landscape, so different from the town she'd known or the eastern cities of her youth. "This is all happening very quickly." Too quickly? He asked, a note of concern in his voice. No, she said after a moment's reflection. Just differently than I imagined my life would unfold. Life rarely follows the paths we imagine for it, he replied. Sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we needed. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, distant coyotes, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the creak of the house settling. Tell me about yourself, Fiona said finally. If we're to be married, I should know more than the fact that you run a successful ranch and care deeply for your niece. Quentin seemed surprised by the request but nodded. Fair enough. I came west with my father and brother when I was 16. My mother had died the year before. Father was chasing silver dreams but had enough sense to stake a land claim as well. The silver didn't pan out, but the land did. And your father? You mentioned you expanded the house after he passed. 5 years ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence. His voice held old grief, tempered by time. He lived to see Double Star become one of the most successful operations in the territory, though. Was proud of that. As he should be. As you should be, Fiona said. What about you? He asked. You mentioned once you came from Boston. What brought you all the way to Copper Creek? Fiona hesitated, then decided honesty was the foundation they needed. Necessity initially. My father lost everything in bad investments. When he died, I had few options. Teaching was one of the few respectable professions open to women, and the West was hiring teachers without asking too many questions about experience. You were running from something, he observed perceptively. Poverty, humiliation, a broken engagement. She hadn't meant to reveal that last part, but it slipped out. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. I'm sorry. Don't be. Harold Palmer decided a penniless bride wasn't to his advantage. It was a valuable lesson in the fragility of certain kinds of promises. She smiled without humor. Perhaps that's why your straightforward proposal appealed to me. No false sentiments, just honest terms. Not entirely without sentiment, he said quietly. I admire you greatly, Fiona. That's not nothing. The use of her given name, spoken in his deep voice, sent an unexpected shiver through her. No, she agreed. That's not nothing. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Fiona divided her time between packing her belongings in town and preparing for her new life at Double Star. Quentin had offered the foreman's cabin as promised, but after seeing how desperately Sarah wanted her company, Fiona had agreed to stay in one of the guest rooms in the main house until the wedding. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but Mrs. Garcia's presence as chaperone and Quentin's respected position in the community mostly silenced potential gossip. The more pressing topic was the speed of the engagement, though, as Mrs. Henderson pointed out to anyone who would listen. They've been circling each other for 2 years. Some people just need a push to recognize what's right in front of them. Fiona wasn't sure about that characterization, but she found herself settling into life at Double Star with surprising ease. Mornings were spent with Sarah, establishing a curriculum and teaching routine. Afternoons often involved helping Mrs. Garcia with household matters or riding with Quentin to familiarize herself with the ranch's extensive property. She discovered that Quentin was not just a successful rancher but a voracious reader with a small but impressive library. Their conversations during evening meals or while sitting on the porch became increasingly engaging, revealing shared interests and compatible viewpoints on many matters. The day before the wedding, Fiona stood in what would soon be her school, a converted storage building near the main house that Quentin's men had been renovating. Fresh whitewash brightened the walls, new windows let in ample light, and sturdy desks built by the ranch carpenter awaited future students. Do you approve? Quentin asked, watching her inspect the space. It's perfect. she said, genuinely moved by the effort he'd put into creating this for her. Better than the schoolhouse in town. I've sent word to the outlying farms and ranches. We already have 8 children besides Sarah who will attend when you're ready to begin. Fiona turned to him, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. You've done all this for me for a woman you barely knew 2 weeks ago. I've known you longer than that, he corrected gently, just from a different distance. Still, she persisted, most men wouldn't accommodate a wife's professional ambitions this way. Most men are fools, then. His direct gaze held hers. You're not giving up your identity to become my wife, Fiona. You're bringing everything you are to our partnership. That's what makes it valuable. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. On impulse, she stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm. Thank you. His expression softened, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, a gesture of connection that felt more intimate than any kiss could have. Tomorrow, he said simply. The wedding was small but lovely, held in the white-clapboard church in Copper Creek. Mrs. Henderson wept openly throughout the ceremony, while Sarah beamed with pride as she carried flowers for her new aunt. Quentin's ranch hands and their families filled several pews, along with townspeople curious about the schoolteacher's sudden change of heart. Fiona wore a simple ivory dress ordered hastily from a dressmaker in Tucson. Quentin looked handsome and somewhat uncomfortable in a new black suit, his usually untamed hair slicked down for the occasion. The vows were traditional love, honor, cherish, but as Fiona repeated them, she found herself meaning each word more deeply than she had expected. When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin leaned down to place a gentle, almost hesitant kiss on her lips. Brief as it was, the contact sent warmth spreading through her body. The celebration afterward at Double Star was lively tables set up in the yard, food prepared by Mrs. Garcia and neighboring ranch wives, music provided by a fiddler and banjo player from town. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Are you happy, Mrs. Blackwood? Quentin asked as they stood together, watching their guests dance. The new name startled her, though not unpleasantly. I believe I am, she answered honestly. It's not the path I expected, but I'm finding I prefer it to the one I had planned. His smile was warm, a private expression she was beginning to recognize as reserved for her alone. I'm glad. As the evening wore on, Fiona found herself growing increasingly aware of what would follow the celebrations. When the last guest had departed and Sarah had been tucked into bed, she and Quentin would be truly alone as husband and wife for the first time. The thought brought both nervousness and a surprising anticipation. Their connection over the past 2 weeks had deepened beyond anything she could have predicted. The respect was still there, but something warmer had grown alongside it, an affection that felt dangerously close to genuine feeling. Finally, the guests began to depart. Mrs. Henderson hugged Fiona tightly before leaving. Be happy, dear, she whispered. He's a good man, the kind who grows on you in all the right ways. Sarah, fighting sleep but losing the battle, received permission to stay up until the last guest left. As the final wagon pulled away, Quentin lifted his sleepy niece into his arms. Time for bed, little one. But it's a special day, she protested through a yawn. And tomorrow will be special too, he assured her. Your Aunt Fiona isn't going anywhere. The simple statement carried such certainty that Fiona felt a lump form in her throat. After Sarah was settled, Quentin returned to find Fiona still standing on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. Second thoughts? He asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. No, she replied truthfully. Just contemplating how much has changed in 2 weeks. I should be in Boston now, starting at a new school. Regrets. She turned to face him fully. None. But I am nervous. His expression was gentle with understanding. We have time, Fiona. All the time we need. I know, she said, gathering her courage. But I don't want to begin our marriage with walls between us. Whatever this is, practical arrangement or something more, I want it to be real. Something shifted in his eyes, a flare of heat quickly controlled. Are you sure? In answer, she reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. He remained perfectly still, allowing her to explore at her own pace. When she rose on tiptoes to press her lips to his, he responded with careful restraint, letting her set the boundaries of their first real kiss. But as her arms wound around his neck, his control slipped. The kiss deepened, his arms encircling her waist to pull her closer. What began as tentative exploration quickly became something more urgent, a revelation of desire neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you standing up to Barnaby at the town meeting. That long? She asked, surprised. That long, he confirmed, though I don't think I realized it at the time. His honesty emboldened her. Taking his hand, she led him inside, through the quiet house to the master bedroom that was now theirs. The room was simply but comfortably furnished, dominated by a large bed covered with a handmade quilt. In the lamplight, they discovered each other slowly with growing confidence. What began as awkward unfamiliarity transformed into something neither had expected, a genuine passion born of mutual respect and dawning affection. Afterward, lying in his arms, Fiona marveled at how quickly certainty had replaced doubt. I think, she said softly against his chest, this might be more than a practical arrangement after all. His arms tightened around her. I was hoping you might come to that conclusion. The following weeks brought adjustment as Fiona settled into her roles as wife, aunt, and teacher. The small schoolhouse welcomed its first students, Sarah, and 8 children from neighboring properties, ranging in age from 6 to 14. The challenges were considerable, but Fiona found herself thriving in ways she never had in the town school, free to implement her own methods without interference. Quentin proved to be a supportive husband, genuinely interested in her work and respectful of her independence. Their evenings together became precious time for conversation, shared reading, or simply enjoying each other's quiet company. Nights brought a deepening physical intimacy that surprised them both with its intensity. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Fiona sat at the desk in their bedroom, reviewing lesson plans for the following week. Quentin entered from his late rounds of the ranch, removing his hat and hanging it on the hook by the door. Still working? He asked, coming to stand behind her chair. Just finishing, she replied, smiling as he bent to kiss the top of her head. How are the new calves? Strong. We didn't lose a single one from the last batch. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, gently massaging the tension from her neck. You're working too hard, says the man who was up before dawn and is only now coming inside. She tilted her head back to look up at him. I love the work. It's different when you're doing something that matters. His fingers paused in their movements. The town school mattered. Yes, but this is different. These children, they're getting an education they wouldn't otherwise have. And Sarah. She smiled, thinking of the girl's rapid progress. She has such potential, Quentin. Thanks to you. He resumed the massage, his strong fingers finding and releasing knots of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. You've changed things here, Fiona. For the better. The simple praise warmed her more than elaborate compliments could have. Over the weeks, she'd come to value his straightforward honesty, his quiet strength, and most surprisingly, his willingness to evolve and adapt alongside her. I received a letter from my cousin in Boston today, she said, covering one of his hands with her own. She's quite shocked by my impulsive Western marriage. Quentin chuckled. I imagine she would be. Do you think she'd be more or less shocked if she knew how quickly you agreed to my proposal? Definitely more. Fiona turned in her chair to face him. But she doesn't understand what we have. And what do we have, Mrs. Blackwood? His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. Fiona considered the question carefully. A partnership that's becoming something more. A foundation of respect that's growing into deeper feeling. It wasn't quite a declaration of love, but it was honest an acknowledgement of the emotional territory they were gradually exploring together. I couldn't have said it better myself, he replied, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Later, lying beside him in the darkness, Fiona reflected on how completely her life had transformed in such a short time. The train to Boston seemed like a distant memory, a path not taken that would have led to a completely different life. Here, in this room, on this ranch, with this man, she had found something she hadn't known she was seeking. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and changing the landscape around Double Star. The school continued to flourish, with 3 more students joining as word spread about the quality of education available. Fiona found herself fully immersed in ranch life, learning about cattle operations, helping with the household management, and even assisting with the fall roundup by keeping records and organizing supplies. One crisp October morning, Fiona woke feeling unusually tired despite a full night's sleep. When the smell of coffee from the kitchen brought a wave of nausea instead of its usual appeal, she began to suspect the cause. After the 3rd consecutive morning of the same symptoms, she sought out Mrs. Garcia's advice. The housekeeper listened to her description with knowing eyes. When was your last monthly, Senora? Fiona calculated quickly, realization dawning. Over 6 weeks ago. I've been so busy with the school, I didn't notice the delay. Mrs. Garcia smiled broadly. I think perhaps you and the patron will have news to share soon. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. A baby had not figured into her immediate plans, though she and Quentin had never taken precautions against the possibility. Their marriage might have begun as a practical arrangement, but their physical relationship had quickly developed an emotional depth that made such considerations seem unnecessary. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Fiona joined Quentin on the porch. The night was cool enough for a blanket, which they shared as they sat side by side on the swing he'd built for her birthday the previous month. You've been quiet today, he observed, his arm around her shoulders. Is everything all right? Fiona took a deep breath. I think that is, I'm fairly certain we're going to have a baby. Quentin went completely still beside her. Then he turned, taking her face gently between his hands. A baby? You're sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor's confirmation. All the signs are there. His face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. A baby? He repeated, wonder in his voice. Then concern clouded his features. Are you? Is this something you want? The question, so characteristic of his consideration for her feelings, cemented what she had been slowly realizing over the past months. Yes, she said firmly. Very much. With you. He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with increasing passion. When they separated, his eyes shone with emotion in the lamplight. I love you, Fiona. I should have said it before now. I think I've loved you since that day you stood up in the town meeting and told Barnaby his educational methods belonged in the last century. The declaration, so simply stated yet so profound, filled her with certainty. And I love you, not just for giving me a home or purpose, but for who you are, your integrity, your kindness, your strength. They sat together for a long time, planning and dreaming, their lives now intertwined in ways neither could have imagined when she'd been packing to leave Copper Creek forever. The news of the baby delighted Sarah, who immediately appointed herself special helper and protector of her future cousin. The entire ranch seemed to celebrate the announcement, with hands and their wives offering congratulations and small gifts. As winter settled over Double Star, bringing snow to the higher pastures and cozy evenings by the fire, Fiona reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led her here. Had she boarded that train to Boston, she would never have known this life, the satisfaction of building something meaningful, the joy of family, the profound connection with a man who valued her completely. Spring came, melting the snow and bringing new life to the ranch. Calves dotted the pastures, wildflowers carpeted the hills, and Fiona's body changed with her advancing pregnancy. The school continued under her direction, though she had begun training one of the older girls as an assistant for when the baby arrived. On a warm May morning, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, Fiona gave birth to a son after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. Mrs. Garcia and the ranch hand's wife who served as midwife pronounced both mother and child healthy and strong. When Quentin was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation. Fiona, exhausted but radiant, held out their blanket-wrapped son. "Meet your father, James Quentin Blackwood," she said softly. Quentin took the tiny bundle with hands that trembled slightly. "He's perfect," he whispered, staring down at the red, wrinkled face with undisguised awe. "You're perfect, both of you." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling their son in one arm while taking Fiona's hand with his free one. "When you were packing to leave, I thought I'd lost my chance forever. I almost didn't speak up." "What changed your mind?" she asked, curious about a detail they'd never fully discussed. "Sarah, actually. She overheard Mrs. Henderson telling someone you were leaving town. She came home in tears, asking why her favorite teacher was going away." He smiled at the memory. She said, "Uncle Quentin, why don't you just ask her to stay?" As if it were the simplest thing in the world. "And was it?" Fiona asked. "Terrifying," he admitted, "but also the best decision I ever made." He leaned forward to kiss her gently. "Thank you for staying." "Thank you for asking," she replied, her heart full as she looked at her husband and son. "It turns out I wasn't meant to leave after all." The years that followed brought changes to Double Star. The school Fiona had started grew into a proper regional school, eventually housed in a purpose-built building funded by neighboring ranchers who recognized the value of education for their children. Sarah blossomed into a confident young woman, eventually departing for college in Denver with plans to become a doctor, ambitions fully supported by both Quentin and Fiona. James was joined by two sisters, Emma and Charlotte, completing their family. The ranch prospered under Quentin's management, expanding its operations and weathering the inevitable droughts and market fluctuations with resilience. Through it all, the partnership that had begun as a practical arrangement deepened into one of the great loves of Copper Creek. Townspeople who had once gossiped about the hasty marriage eventually pointed to the Blackwoods as an example of what marriage should be, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection that only grew stronger with time. On their 10th anniversary, Quentin surprised Fiona with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their marriage. As they stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the bay, watching the magnificent city spread before them, he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Any regrets about that train you didn't take?" he asked, his voice warm against her ear. Fiona leaned back against his solid strength, thinking of all they had built together, family, school, community, of the love that had grown from the seeds of respect and admiration into something unshakable and profound. "Not one," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. The years had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but to her, He was more handsome than ever, familiar and beloved, the center of a life far richer than any she could have imagined when packing her trunks to leave Copper Creek forever. Staying was the best decision I ever made. His kiss tasted of promise kept and adventures still to come, a reflection of the partnership they had forged together. One day at a time. From the moment he had said those life-changing words, "Stay and be my wife." And she had stayed, finding in his arms not just a home, but her true destination.